following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners on Saga 960 AM and those listening around the world on streaming and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for practical advice for everyday problems using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. This episode, I'm going to focus on a favorite subject of mine inspired by conversations recently with clients: boosting your inner coach and quieting your inner critic. Yes, we're talking inner coach versus inner critic tonight, and this probably will inspire questions. So if you've got one, 289-275-9600 if you want to get in touch with me and leave a message, or Liana at nottherapyshow.com if you want to reach me directly by email, Lian as in Nancy A at nottherapyshow.com, or if that's too much to remember, contact form on nottherapyshow.com. You can email me there if you want to have a comment for the show or if you want to possibly book a coaching session. You can also get in touch with me at Not Therapy Show on Twitter and Instagram. Right. Now, like I said, I'm currently a coach. I've been a critic at different times in my career, specifically a video game critic, but I was also one of the writers and the senior producer on the Much Music show Fromage, the one with Ed the Sock. Yeah. So like I said, I've been both coach and critic, so I know there's a place for both. But a lot of people engage their inner critic too much and the inner coach not enough. That leaves people feeling demotivated, hopeless, and depressed. That don't leave the cave mentality we've talked about on previous weeks. Now, we've talked a lot on episodes of this show about the scientific reasons for this, and I press that button a lot because the understanding of the science helps you quiet that inner critic. Now, I'm going to specifically focus on the part of it that's referred to as the negativity bias right now. Now, put simply, the negativity bias is the reality that bad things hit us psychologically harder than good things, even when the magnitude of the good thing is equal to that of the bad thing. Now, that's wordy. So here's an example that I think illustrates the point, and I'm deliberately picking something contentious because it's funny. You know the final season of Game of Thrones? Spicy take incoming. The final season of Game of Thrones wasn't that bad. Oh my God, cue hate mail. I gave up the email address. Look out. Yep. But it wasn't. The final season of Game of Thrones was just okay. It wasn't terrible. I've rewatched it recently. It was better the second time around. It's just that parts of it were disappointing. And those disappointing parts stung way more than the good parts. The fact that all the not terrible people who were still alive mostly ended up in good places. That was awesome, but that's hardly a ringing endorsement, right? And that's the point. The parts we were disappointed at, the parts I was disappointed at the first time around, stayed with me after the first watch. It was a completely different experience the second time around. The second time around, it wasn't horrible. It was okay. It just wasn't amazing. And there were parts of it that were still really frustrating. And the first time around, because of the negativity bias, those horrible parts hit us all harder. That's how the negativity bias works, right? Now, there's a related concept that's also important called loss aversion. Loss aversion is a cognitive bias that describes why people find the pain of losing psychologically. It can be twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. Now, that exact number, I said it can be because the science is sort of split on that, but it's powerful, right? The pain of losing is much worse than the pleasure of winning. Now, think about it, okay? Imagine winning $100. That's not bad. Everybody can use $100, right? It's not $1 million, right? It's not winning the lottery, but $100 is nice, right? Now imagine losing $100. That stings a lot more than the thought of winning $100, doesn't it? That's how loss aversion works. And that's why a lot of people, I'd say the majority of people, live their lives to avoid loss instead of to maximize gains. The thing is, game theory indicates that this isn't the best way to get good at the game of life. Now, I'm a gamer, so we're approaching one of my favorite subjects. I lecture on video games. I'm doing a lot of that this week at the university level, just to give you a slice of my life. So this is really front of mind. Here we go. If you're a gamer, or you know one, you may have heard the term min-maxing. Now, sometimes it's used as sort of a derogatory joke for people who take it too far or people who are really obnoxious about it. But min-maxing is also a strategy. It's smart strategy. Basically, there's a lot of different definitions floating around, but overall, it means maximizing results while minimizing the effort you have to go through to maximize those results. It's about playing strategically. It means focusing on your strengths and minimizing the importance of your weaknesses. Now, loss aversion makes this extremely difficult because when you're making those strategic sacrifices, what if something bad happens? You're deliberately creating weaknesses in your character, and weaknesses are terrible things according to loss aversion, according to the negativity bias, right? Now, this is when we gamers tell the inner critic to shut up. And we engage our inner coach based on experiences with past games. And our inner coach says, get good. That's a gamer joke. If you don't get why that's funny, that's fine. Can't win them all. Loss aversion. It's not possible to go through life with no weaknesses. It's not possible to go through life and never lose. And much like in a video game, the seriousness of a given weakness, how much you'll lose because of it, is tied to what you want and need to do in the game or in life. For instance, you don't need to be the greatest public speaker in the world to be a computer coder, right? I picked that one. Yes, it's a cliche, but some cliches are based on a lot of truth, right? But if you want to be a trial lawyer, public speaking is a lot more important, right? Flip that around. A basic understanding of computers is needed to practice family law. You're going to have to use a computer for paperwork and stuff like that, correspondence. But does a family lawyer need to be able to program? No. We get this, but we don't apply it to other problems. And most people don't apply it enough because of negativity bias and loss aversion, right? But anyone who achieves greatness knows that there are trade-offs. You got to give up some stuff. You got to close some doors to maximize your output. Now, in gamer terms, these trade-offs, these doors you close on certain skills are known as dump stats. Funny term. Anything with the word dump on it makes me laugh. But a dump stat is a skill where a poor value is accepted so that you can have aptitudes in other areas. In a video game, a warrior, a fighter, might have intelligence as a dump stat. Guys who hit things really hard with hammers and axes don't have to be terribly smart. A sorcerer, on the other hand, might have a dump stat in strength. You don't need a lot of strength to wave a wand. A dump stat is basically the thing you need the least. So it's a smarter move to dump it. Get it? Now, life isn't quite that simple, so I'm going to give you a more nuanced example, still from a video game. This is going to be the theme for the night. If you don't like video games, why not? They're awesome. Now, I'll understand if the video game I'm about to talk about, the one I'm currently playing, is not your cup of tea. It is definitely not for everyone. And yes, like literally currently playing. I've got the sound off, but I've got it sitting here farming runes while I talk to you. Yes, Elden Ring fans, I've got the War Dead Catacombs going as we speak. Inside reference, it's okay if you didn't get it. Elden Ring is the latest game from Software, with lore developed by George R.R. Martin, tying it into the Game of Thrones thing earlier. Now, like all From Software games, it's harder than the average game. So leveling everything takes more skill. Now, it's also a game designed to trigger loss aversion. So it's not for the faint of heart. Elden Ring requires you to learn by dying. A lot. And to rub it in, every time you die, the game puts up a big red "you died" on the screen. It's a From Software trope, the "you died." It's like the game going at you, right? Worse, those runes I mentioned, that's your in-game currency. And every time you die, you lose all of them and have to get back to the spot you died at without dying again. Or you lose those runes permanently. Now, there's tactics to get around that, but most people are going, why do people do this for fun? It's an acquired taste. It's a game that requires you to confront loss over and over and over again until it builds up your aversion tolerance to it. Now, at first, that's no one's idea of a good time. It is awful in the early going. But the better you get and the more you get the feeling for it, the better and better it gets. Now, you have to put in a lot of time to get there. But a lot of people, a lot of From Software aficionados talk about it being a good life skill. It actually affects their attitude. It's an acquired taste, like I said. Don't judge me. I never said I was normal. I'm a weirdo. I do weird things for fun, okay? It's on topic for this discussion, though. Because what you need to get through "you died" over and over and over and over again is your inner coach, not your inner critic. The inner coach is that voice in your head telling you it can be done if you keep at it. The inner critic is saying, give up, you suck. And if you give into that, you're not going to get anywhere in this game. It can be downright frustrating at times. Now let's get back to the min-maxing for a moment. This is all tying into the big metaphor for life I'm reaching towards Rachel Maddow style, right? Elden Ring has very few attributes that you can totally dump stat, just ignore, and not struggle terribly in some parts of the game. You have to pick your priorities, but you also have to not completely neglect things that aren't your strength. And that's more like life, right? Especially when it comes to people skills. For instance, I will never be a party animal, but I needed to learn how to become comfortable enough in crowds because it's part of the job in anything connected to entertainment. Will it ever be my favorite thing? No, I'm much more of a small group one-on-one person. But am I competent at navigating environments like loud parties, like addressing large groups, like television? Usually. I'm usually decent enough at that. And I say usually decent because no matter how adept at things you are involving other people, everyone has those "you died" moments sometimes. It's a feature, not a bug, just like playing Elden Ring. And that's a good place to go to break. And this is a big teaser. When I come back, okay, we're going to talk more about those social embarrassments and how the inner coach and the inner critic balance and how you can balance their respective volumes to have it not be so soul destroying. After the break, inner coach versus inner critic continues on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana Kirsner. I'm still not a therapist, and I'm still talking inner coach versus inner critic while I farm runes on Elden Ring in the background. Now, before the break, I promised to focus on how all of this applies to, well, we'll call them social faux pas. Now, everyone has moments where they put their foot in their mouth, accidentally offend someone important, and it feels like an Elden Ring video game you died moment, right? The thing that separates people and is a big factor in success is what thought processes happen after the you died moments, right? Someone with a dominant inner coach thinks, that didn't come out as intended. And my boyfriend, my boss's husband, or my sister's new girlfriend, they seem offended. Maybe I'd better apologize and make sure things are okay, or at least better. They might still think I'm a jerk, but they'll think I'm less of a jerk if I say something than if I do nothing. That's what a dominant inner coach thinks. Someone with a really loud inner critic thinks, you idiot, this is why no one likes you. You screw everything up and shouldn't be around people. And it actually goes on much longer than that. It can be harsher than that. A lot of you know this, and I don't want to trigger you by continuing. You get the idea, right? That inner critic is good for exactly one thing: stopping you from trying things. It's your inner parent screaming at your inner child so they don't get hit by a proverbial car. Without something of this inner critic instinct, we risk being reckless. Kind of like Princess Aurora in that Angelina Jolie movie Maleficent. That kid had no fear, so Maleficent had to literally stop the kid from just walking off a cliff. She had no sense of self-preservation. The problem is that inner critic that stops us from walking off the cliff, the anti-Wile E. Coyote, that inner critic doesn't tend to stay confined to the appropriate survival instincts unless you put some checks on it. Inner critics like to spread out. They like to spread their wings to things that really aren't the end of the world, that aren't catastrophically dangerous. And unchecked, the inner critic makes more and more things feel more and more bad. And eventually, everything feels like a life or death situation. Now, compare that to the inner coach's monologue of, not the worst thing ever, not the best, we'll do better next time. That monologue is usually more appropriate to most things in life, right? But that's not the inner voice a lot of us were raised to amplify. Now, why is that? The negativity bias I mentioned in the first segment. Negativity biases, that inner critic, get stronger unless you actively and mindfully check them with your inner coach. Because the inner critic is an instinct. The inner coach is a learned skill. Now that dichotomy, inner critic is instinct, inner coach is learned and conscious skill, that's why most humans are pretty good at surviving, but we're lousy at truly thriving. Now, I bring up video games because it's much easier in a video game to face you died over and over and over again because we know we'll get another chance. Or we can just turn the game off and never touch it again and glare at the box evilly ever since. Either way, no matter how you handle it, we know that video games don't impact our overall lives, really. Unless you're like me and are connected to them somehow in business. This is why I take video games so seriously. I'm a game dev. Meanwhile, in real life, that I try to make as much like a game as possible, every single client I have under the age of 25 lives in existential terror of failure. The real life you died screen, because they believe it will be catastrophic. That's it. No other chance. This is a thing with younger millennials, Gen Z, and it causes them to avoid doing things, important things, things that will make them happy, because of overwhelming anxiety connected to loss aversion. Now, obviously, not doing things makes the likelihood of overall life failure greater. They're aware of this. They're smart people. So their anxiety increases. And it becomes this feedback loop of, I should do it, but what if I fail? I'm going to fail, so I shouldn't do it. But if I don't do it, I'm definitely going to, and they end up sick, exhausted, and that's when their parents pay to have them see me. And the fact that their parents are the ones paying indicates that these younger people have got a softer landing than most do, certainly more than I did. But their entire world has encouraged them to develop an intense loss aversion instead of doing the real life equivalent of flinging themselves at Elden Ring bosses and getting the "you died" screen over and over until they beat the challenge. Now, sometimes you have to go and level or get a certain item and come back and try the boss again. Metaphor for life, metaphor for life. This is what these young adults are not doing, because they're too afraid of the "you died" screen to beat the game, right? Now, the people encouraging this, intentionally or not, they're everywhere in these young adults' lives. They've been there their entire life. And they range from, sometimes well-meaning parents are contributing, but also extended family, teachers, peer groups, the media they consume, the comment section in the media they consume. Even some therapists do it. And some of these people are legitimately bad actors who want to see people fail. They want to burn it all down. But other people legitimately think they're helping. And they're not. They're normalizing. And, anybody who listens to this show enough knows I'm not a big fan of normal. That's why I say you're crazy is only problem if it's hurting you. Top 10 phrase that I close the show with. Here's why I don't like normal and normalization, okay? Normalization is a form of seeking perfection. And top 10 phrase, perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. Right? Normalization, that quest for perfect normalcy, what it results in is profound mediocrity. We don't like mediocrity here at It's Not Therapy. We want to coach you to be your best self, not a mediocre version of whoever you're supposed to be, air quotes. Sure, you won't embarrass anyone by being mediocre, but you're never gonna slay that giant dragon either. No matter how many anime you watch where the totally average guy stumbles into a magical girlfriend plot and somehow saves the world using her power. Okay, those were the plots of a lot of movies in the 1980s too. Gen X was full of that, but we were the slacker generation. We knew it was nonsense, okay? They were more wish fulfillment for a lot of stuff that sucks back then. Now, it seems like a promise. Somehow, people buy in. The other thing about 80s movies that is seen as problematic now, you can hear the air quotes in my voice, right? But another hot take, Weird Science still rocks as a cheesy movie though, okay? All right. Those guys were science nerds. They weren't mediocre there. But for people who weren't around in the 80s, Weird Science is a movie about two teenagers that use a computer to create a woman because they were teased by jocks. And you can imagine what this woman looks like, right? She was hot, right? And now we're at the 1980s movie to modern anime continuum. And I am digressing, which is what the kids today call a derail. We're going to move on. There is a method to my mad science here, okay? Because the ridiculousness of using awesome science skills just to be popular, right? It seems stupid, but it's actually a very human urge. Popularity is at the center of the anxiety plaguing these younger millennials and Gen Z and some people of all generations, right? The 1980s movie to modern anime continuum exists for a reason. People in all age ranges catastrophize when someone doesn't like them. But this catastrophizing when someone doesn't like you got cranked up to over 9,000 because Gen Z was raised with an acute awareness of cancel culture. Now, I'm not going to open up the cancel culture sore again. I did an entire episode before, leaving it there. Listen to it if you want. But basically, the thinking goes, if one person doesn't like you, then they might have friends who also don't like you. And then they may have so many friends that don't like you that they'll get you kicked out of school, fired, or otherwise ruin your life with a false accusation. That's the thinking. And it's easy to roll your eyes at this. I can hear you, some people, rolling your eyes at this, but it's a sincere fear, right? Everyone who has this fear knows someone who knows someone it happened to. You know, like Joe Rogan and the kids with the kitty litter. Okay, I'm joking here just to lighten the mood because this is like existential crisis territory for some people. And kidding aside, I know people personally who had their life ruined by false accusations. I've lived through so many literal and figurative cancellations. I work in the media, but you know, the literal TV cancellation happened before social media was big. I think it was like Facebook might have been around. It was definitely the what is it? MySpace days? Yeah, MySpace. You know, cancellations happen in entertainment. And as much as we all know it's coming someday, there are the ones that just something ran its time. And then there are the really toxic ones where you never get the real reason why you were canceled, you know, fired, ostracized, whatever. You never get a reason that feels legit. And a lot of the time it just comes down to the people in power wanted you gone for, they don't even need a good reason. It probably wasn't a good reason. You know why it probably wasn't a good reason? Because if they had a good reason, if they had strong moral grounds, they'd tell you. Because why wouldn't you? It tactically doesn't make sense not to tell you if you did something clearly wrong. That's the thing, though. This sort of cancellation, this ostracization, this unfairness, that very thing that a lot of people are terrified of, those are major bricks on the road to achievement. Why is it a brick road? Because I get to sing, follow the yellow brick road, follow the yellow brick road. I'll spare you, okay? When you're good at things, like legit good at things, your strongest strengths, people will resent that. They'll be threatened by it. They'll try to tear you down. I know these are cliches, but here's the part, you know, your reassuring family members won't tell you, usually. Sometimes people will succeed in tearing you down. It happens to all of us. And then what happens? You either sit there staring at the "you died" screen forever, or you reload from the last checkpoint, try again, and hopefully get your proverbial Elden Ring runes back. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes it'll be that really frustrating moment where you had a ton of them and you died in a really lousy place and they're gone. And if you're like me, you smash the arm of your chair a few times, scare your cat, you suck it up, you're back on it. Yeah, get back up, right? I tell myself I can get more. I just have to keep grinding at it. And that's the way an inner coach talks, right? But some people, most people, need an outer coach to learn that thinking. So I'm going to take a break now because these have been really long segments. And I'm going to come back with some ways that you can begin that process. I'm going to coach your inner coach, okay? If you have questions, 289-275-9600 or Liana at nottherapyshow.com. That's L-I-A as in Nancy at nottherapyshow.com. Or contact me. If you need a coach, contact me on nottherapyshow.com. Fill out the contact form. Not Therapy Show on Twitter and Instagram. There's extra content there every week. We'll be back after this break on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. And we are back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still referring to myself as we, but I mean me and you. I'm still not a therapist, and I'm still talking inner coach versus inner critic. And it's time for those tips on how to develop your inner coach. Now, if you want additional information on this, give me a call, 289-275-9600. That's 289-275-9600. Or my preferred method of contact, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Or the contact form on nottherapyshow.com. You can also get extra content on Twitter and Instagram at nottherapyshow. Now, joking aside, I've been goofing around a lot this week. This is a difficult concept for beginners. So I'm going to use an example from multiple client sessions last week that actually inspired me to talk about this. I also mentioned it on my YouTube channel, and a lot of people could relate. A lot of comments were like, yep, that's me. And it kind of broke my heart. Not because I'm like, oh, there's poor people, because I remember feeling this way. It's about having permission to take up space. What? Okay, if you've never had to struggle with this, bless you. Okay? A lot of people have. It really hit a pop. You know the whole manspreading thing? You know that silly thing that became part of like transit system ads? That tendency some men have to spread their legs way out in public areas like movie theaters, public transit, airplanes, you know, stuff like that. You know, like it's a dog in the sun, like, roar, like taking up the space of both people on either side. It's not that common. It's low class, and the whole joking debate around it turned into a powder keg. Well, in part thanks to Tumblr, but it also hit some raw nerves. What that campaign failed to factor in is that a lot of people are walking around feeling like their mere presence is a burden to the people around them. Any space they inhabit, any resources they consume, you know, that's taking up too much space, you know, and they constantly fight the feeling that it might be better if, yeah, you get where this is going. No more needs to be said. Like I said, I've been in that place. I get it. To say it sucks to be in that place is a huge understatement. And when you're in that place, you hope beyond hope that someone is going to come along and give you permission to take up space, right? Give you permission basically to exist without huge amounts of guilt. In my case, that didn't happen. I had to create the permission structure for myself, piecing together little bits of things, a little bit from therapy, a lot from video games, right? I love video games. It's impossible to piece together this permission structure when your inner critic is screaming at you. Your inner critic is the thing telling you you don't deserve to take up space. The job of your inner coach is to make you realize you do deserve to take up space. You are worth it. You bring benefit to the planet, right? Because the inner coach is able to reframe your failures, weaknesses, and shortcomings into something useful instead of just awful. Your inner coach is also able to make you truly feel and be centered in the stuff you are legitimately good at. Maybe not the best in the world, but you don't have to be the best in the world at things to have value. If you had to be the best in the world for things to have value, then only a tiny minority of the population would have any value. That's just not so. You can think about people who are very, very important to you. Are they the absolute best at anything but being them? Exactly. So why are you an exception to that? Your inner coach, that thing that you're having trouble connecting to right now, if you feel like you don't have permission to take up space, your inner coach is based on the self-evident truth that you have value as a human being just because you're a human being. Everyone has value as a human being, even the worst person in the world. And anytime someone acts like you're worthless, well, being treated like they were worthless, being neglected is usually a big reason, or you're flat out being abused is the reason most terrible people are terrible people. You know, being spoiled rotten as a kid is a form of neglect. So anytime someone treats you like you're worthless, that's their problem. And you know the top 10 phrase that's coming. Don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. And that's what feeling like you don't deserve to take up space because of the treatment of other people is. It's a mistake you don't have to make. Just because someone, or seemingly everyone, treats you like you're worthless, that doesn't mean it's true. Yes, everyone can be wrong sometimes. Frequently, the majority is wrong about a lot of things. Just look at certain past election results. No matter what part of the political spectrum you are, every election, somebody thinks the majority was wrong, right? There you go. Because that's the truth. There isn't 100% consensus on anything. Nothing. No, everyone thinks so. Everyone thinks so is a fallacy, right? Everyone loves that person. Everyone hates me. No, not true. That's a fallacy. That's the negativity bias clouding your thinking. Now, I mentioned fallacy, and learning about logical fallacies can help you build your inner coach. It helped me a lot, but I'm very cautious in recommending self-guided tours on that one because the internet is terrible for weaponizing fallacies. The fallacy is a real thing. Social media is a terrible place to learn critical thinking. Other parts of the internet, slightly less bad. It takes years to really master critical thinking. And we're dealing with the beginner course right here, right? This episode, beginner course. That'll come later. You know, the Stoics and all that stuff. I love my Stoic philosophy, but that's advanced. Beginner course right now is so you completely screwed up. Let's say you're right. Everything's a disaster. Everything is lost. Now what? Right? Think about how many stories start with someone at their low point. You know, It's a Wonderful Life for older people like me who watch black and white movies and like them. Newer reference. Marvel Cinematic Universe character Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange, right? Brilliant but narcissistic, socially maladjusted surgeon gets his hands mangled in a car wreck, needs to take a new path, and learns magic as well as humility. Okay, this arc isn't well executed in the first movie. Doctor Strange makes a bunch of circles with his hands, somehow became Sorcerer Supreme despite having only one magic move, and he was still arrogant as anything by the end of the movie, but you get the general idea of the concept, right? And the fact that he's that guy actually is useful here, right? By that guy, I mean, that guy who succeeds despite being mediocre because his name is on the movie. Yeah, everybody hates that guy. At least I don't like guys like that because I don't get that privilege. And that's when my inner coach tells me, stop focusing on them and run your own race. Right. Life's too short for envy. Well, that inner critic, the one that made me deconstruct Doctor Strange, because somebody's going to complain, the inner critic is designed to stop you in your tracks. The inner coach keeps you moving and gets you back on the right track. That's the difference. The inner coach encourages you to rest when needed. But when the inner coach is engaged properly, you feel like you're making progress, even if it's sometimes slow. Now, the best way to work with your inner coach is to work with an outer coach. But I'm going to avoid the shameless plug for my services of people like me. If you've got friends with good empathy skills, that's good enough. But usually the people who struggle with this stuff are pretty socially isolated or have lousy friends. That's a major part of the problem. And I'm going to take my last break and come back and talk more about that. Again, this episode might dredge up a lot. So Liana at Not Therapy Show is my email. LIA as in Nancy, A is my email, or the contact form on nottherapyshow.com if you want to get in touch with me and unpack this stuff privately. We'll be back after the break in the closing moments. I'm still not a therapist, but I am the voice of your inner coach on the outside. That's not inner. Anyway, go to break. I'll recollect my thoughts. I'll get it next time. This segment was my "you died" screen. All right, regroup after the break. Back in a few. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. I'm still mining runes in Elden Ring while this is going on. And I promised we're going to keep on the idea of the inner coach telling the inner critic to pipe down. We've got versus mode right now. And I was talking about how, some people, they can't afford the services of a professional. That's the reason I started this, because I know what it's like to not be able to afford the services you need. The system has holes in it. And, you might not have supportive people. The people around you could be, actively part of the criticism. Right. Now what? Now, most of the people who have this problem, you can reach me at Liana at Not Therapy Show, nottherapyshow.com. I'm racing through this because I don't want to run out of time here. Because family of origin is a major source of a really loud inner critic. It just is. Even, I half jokingly say all parents screw up their kids, some more than others. It's just life. That's not saying every parent is a terrible parent. See, that's the critic, not the coach. It's just nobody's perfect. Perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. Top 10 phrase. Even loving parents can awaken the inner critic in people because their own inner critic is very, very loud. Now, those are families that tend to be ones that are, working class. No one amounted to much, and that's no shame, but there's a lot of shame in those families. It develops into a counterintuitive, you ain't better than me, pride, right? Or the appearance of pride. Now, pride is a sin for a reason, right? Because the problem arises when that seemingly benevolent, you ain't better than me, clashes with the fact that, you want better for yourself, right? And that's when pride goes from a positive thing to a negative thing, because things in those families can get punitive really fast. You get surrounded by other critics, outer critics, speaking through their individual inner critics. Because the minute anybody thinks they're better than me, that makes that person feel that, hibernating shame, or that shame they're denying that they didn't amount to more. And that's the first thing I encourage people to think about when they're dealing with a critical environment, be it a family, work, school, whatever. People like that who viciously criticize others are usually saying the very same things to themselves about themselves, only worse. Remember I said I used to be a video game reviewer? The only group of people more miserable collectively than video game reviewers are stand-up comedians. That's in my experience. Those are just the groups I've had the displeasure of being a part of. No judgment there, just fact. The worst. Now, I have it on good authority from friends that opera singers may have both those groups beat. I'll take their word for it because I don't have those singing skills. That's a dump stat. Now, you might be thinking as I'm slightly goofing around here, but those are cool jobs. Exactly. They're cool when you actually get to do them, but they're also highly competitive. So those environments are very likely to become toxic. That's another thing a coach does. A coach gives you a sense of structural perspective. That person being mean to you might just be trying to survive a toxic environment. So maybe compassion for both yourself and them will go farther than a grudge. The only person you need to compare yourself to is the person you were yesterday. No one else ultimately matters. Are you a better person today than you were yesterday? Did you accomplish more today? That's what matters. And I can all you hear you see, but what if you didn't? You didn't have the spoons, you did nothing. Well, a coach can reframe that too. Okay, you needed the rest. What's the plan for tomorrow? That's another major factor. Look forward, not back. And I'm out of time on the radio version right now, but the podcast is gonna keep going. Critics are great at picking apart what you've done in the past. But while painful learning experiences sometimes help, there comes a point where you have to set them aside and move forward. Easier said than done, right? In this case, moving forward instead of looking back is a simple idea, but that doesn't mean it's easy at first. Self-doubt is powerful because all those cognitive biases where caveman brain goes, stay in the cave. But embarrassment isn't getting eaten, even though it can feel like it sometimes. This is when you tell yourself that you survive embarrassment. It's a figurative social you died, not a literal one. That can feel the opposite of comforting when your life seems to be spiraling out of control, though. And that idea of dying can be comforting when the pain just won't stop. But this is when something I learned in trauma counseling kicks in. The inner coach, in times of panic, instructs you to control what you can control. Can you set a boundary? Can you get space? Can you refuse to move? Can you walk away instead of having the same old fight? Even doing small things in a different way can have big impacts on that feeling that you have no control. Yeah, you probably don't believe me right now, but what's the alternative to trying? The same old bad, right? Right, give it a try. That's the show for tonight. Again, Liana at Not Therapy Show, or contact form at Not Therapy Show. If you have a question, we are coming up hard on time, which is why I cut the radio version short. Again, if you're listening on Saga 960, check out the podcast version anywhere you get your podcast. It's Not Therapy with Liana Kersner. Signing off for now. You know what I'm going to say. Your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Have a great week.